Let's start at 410. We'll sing first, second, and last verse. It's so sweet. Trust in Jesus. It's so sweet to trust in Jesus, just to take Him at His word, just to rest upon His promise, just to know, thus saith the Lord. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust Him, how I prove Him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust Him more. Oh, how sweet to trust in Jesus, just to trust His cleansing blood, just in simple faith to plunge me beneath the healing cleansing blood. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust Him, how I proved Him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust Him more. I'm so glad I learned to trust Him, precious Jesus, Savior, friend. And I know that He is with me, will be with me to the end. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust Him, how I prove Him o'er and o'er. Jesus, Jesus, precious Jesus, oh, for grace to trust Him more. Complete in Thee, no work of mine may take, dear Lord, the place of mine. Thy blood hath pardoned bought for me, and I am now complete in Thee. Complete in Thee, no more shall sin. Thy grace hath conquered reign within. Thy voice shall bid the tempter flee, and I shall stand complete in Thee. Yea, justified, O blessed God, and sanctified, salvation wrought. Thy blood hath pardoned bought for me, and for it I too shall be. Complete in Thee, each want supplied, and no good thing to be denied, since Thou my portion, Lord, will be.
to Psalm chapter 10. And so I read something there. I get these emails from basically a preacher help website, several of them. But anyway, I was reading through one the other day. It said, it seems that this is a difficult time for preachers to come up with what to preach. And I said, yeah, it is. I was thinking about continuing the message from 2 weeks ago, Acts 27, which I sure enjoyed studying through that passage. But the Lord kind of directed me to Psalm chapter 10. And, like I said earlier, I got a lot of stuff just kind of going on in my mind about what's going on in our country. And some of it's confusing to us, but it just concerns me. It ought to concern all of us when we turn on the news and see American cities burning. Something's not right there. And you know what? The fact is our country's built on laws, and those laws need to be administered. And so anyway, all this stuff's going through my mind. I read over Psalm 10 earlier in the week, and in verse number 1 it says, "Why standest thou afar off, O Lord? Why hidest thou thyself in times of trouble?" Well, that verse caught my attention, and I got to thinking just about our current circumstance of, well, just this week, these riots that, I told you earlier, that just bothers me greatly. But then you think on top of that, this pandemic, and maybe the response to that pandemic is greater than the pandemic itself. But, I was just thinking, where is God in all of this? And the psalmist here, it's interesting that if you read Psalm 46, it's almost the exact opposite, 46:1. It's almost the exact opposite of Psalm 10:1. Psalm 46:1, God is a refuge, a very present help in trouble. And in Psalm 10, he says, well, Lord, where are you in trouble? Where are you in times of trouble? And so it appears in this psalm that the psalmist has this question, and it's not an unreasonable question. It's just he's wondering, Lord, where are you? And if you read the rest of the psalm, basically what he's saying is why aren't you judging people who are disobeying you? I mean, look in verse number 2. He says, the wicked in his pride doth persecute the poor. Let them be taken in their devices that they've imagined. He says, the wicked boasts of his heart's desire, and he blesses covetousness, or the covetous, whom the Lord abhors. The wicked, through his pride and his countenance, will not seek after God. God's not in all his thoughts. His ways are always grievous. Thy judgments are far above out of his sight. Meaning, they don't even think about the consequences of being judged by God. They don't think that's ever going to happen. Verse 6, he says, he hath said in his heart, I shall not be moved, for I shall never be in adversity. His mouth is full of cursing and deceit and fraud. Under his tongue is mischief and vanity. He sits in the lurking places of the villages, and the secret places doth he murder the innocent. His eyes are privily set against the poor. He lies in wait secretly as a lion in his den. He lies in wait to catch the poor. He doth catch the poor when he draws him into his net. He crouches and humbleth himself, that the poor may fall by his strong ones. He said in his heart, God has forgotten. He hides his face. He'll never see it. Arise, O Lord, O God. Lift up thine hand. Forget not the humble. He says, wherefore doth the wicked contemn or despise God? He has said in his heart, thou wilt not require it. And you have to kind of do a little study to see what that means. But basically the phrase, thou will not require me, is there's no judgment for what we are doing. And the psalmist's question is, where in the world is God when people are doing things they shouldn't be doing? And even beyond that, he says in verse number 1, he says, you're hiding thyself in times of trouble. And it's kind of a personal trouble. Matter of fact, I was reading just some thoughts by an older preacher last night, and he said that phrase, time of trouble, in the Hebrew, according to some of the rabbis, it had the idea in the time when you are our only hope. Where in the world are you, God, when you're the only hope for this mess that I'm in? Or that maybe that surrounds me? And so I would just kind of, by way of introduction, introduce the idea here that sometimes it seems that God has disappeared. I mean, look in Psalm 13 and verse 1. How long wilt thou forget me, O Lord? Forever? How long will you hide your face from me? I mean, where in the world is God when I'm struggling? Where is God when my situation falls apart? And that's kind of what the psalmist is talking about here. He's talking about when his situation has become so desperate and he's going through the storm, the trouble, where God's the only one who can deliver him. He says, Lord, you're the only one that can help me, but I can't find you in the midst of all of this. I copied this poem that I thought I'd read, and I know you all know it, but I just want to read it. One night a man had a dream. He dreamed he was walking along the beach with the Lord. Across the sky flashed scenes from his life. For each scene, he noticed two sets of footprints in the sand, one belonging to him and the other to the Lord. When the last scene of his life flashed before him, he looked back at the footprints in the sand. He noticed many times along the path of his life there was only one set of footprints. He also noticed that it happened at the very lowest and saddest times in his life. That really bothered him, and he questioned the Lord. Questioned the Lord. Psalm 10 verse 1 is a question to God. Where are you? And the poem, the author here says, Lord, you said once I decided to follow you, you'd walk with me all the way. But I've noticed that during the most troublesome times in my life, there's only one set of footprints. I don't understand why when I needed you most, you would leave me. And the Lord replied, my son, my precious child, I love you and I would never leave you. During your times of trial and suffering, when you see only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. And so, I just want to talk to you this morning about, we just sang about it, 'tis so sweet to trust in Jesus. Just trusting in God when things don't make sense. I read this week about a Christian rock singer. I don't know him. I don't recognize his name. It says the lead singer of a Christian rock band and the son of a pastor, which I think is interesting. I don't think the guy's that popular, but the national news media sure, they kind of attached to this, or they got onto this. The son of a pastor announced on Instagram that he no longer believes in God. He said, I've been terrified to post this for a while, but it feels like it's time for me to be honest. John Steingard, the frontman for the band Hawk Nelson, I have no idea who or what that is, but he wrote in the caption of a lengthy note on May 20th, he said, after growing up in a Christian home, being a pastor's kid, playing and singing in a Christian band, having the word Christian in front of me most of the things in my life, I now find that I no longer believe in God. He said, last week after struggling for years over the reliability of the Bible, he said he no longer believes that God exists. Goes on to say that I guess he questioned why an all-loving God allows evil in the world, which pastors and Christian apologists know is not an uncommon question. So here is a person, I don't know him, and But he has basically said, well, God doesn't exist because I can't, I don't think the Bible's true, and there's evil in the world. And why in the world would God allow evil to exist in this world? And that's really kind of a whole nother sermon, but I am going to touch here. I'm going to kind of explain some of why we think God is afar off at times. But could I just kind of give you, before I dive into this passage, could I give you a couple of principles to remember just as a believer? As we've been going through this pandemic, something has kind of been on my mind about our personal relationship with Christ. When you're not able to unite corporately, publicly, then the only thing you might have to hang on to is your real relationship between you and Jesus. And if you don't have it, it probably is lacking. And that's kind of bothered me, because I know there's some people, their relationship, probably isn't what it ought to be, and the church certainly helps to encourage that. But you know what? Listen, hey, when you stand before God, you will not be judged on the character, on my character. You'll be judged on your character. You'll be judged on your relationship with God. Not on dads or the preachers. Hey, when you stand before God, it's what you got going on between Him and you. And I just want to say by way of introduction, some principles to remember about your faith is this. You're going to run into some things that you don't understand. And don't be surprised. You do it every day. You probably don't understand how your car works. I don't understand how electricity works. I don't understand how pills work that I take to help lower my blood pressure. But I take them anyway. Hey, listen, we live in a world where we don't understand all kinds of things. But people say, well, I just can't understand how God's doing it. I guess God don't exist because I don't understand it. Are you kidding me? You get in your car and drive around and you don't understand it? You're going to run into some storms in life that don't make a bit of sense. You're going to wrestle with some things in your mind where God doesn't make sense at all. Why in the world did God allow that to happen? When I was pastoring in South Carolina, we had a young girl. She was about 22 years old, and she went to Bible college, just graduated, got her degree in elementary education or something like that. She went up to a Christian camp to work. She was looking forward to being a school teacher and being a camp counselor. She got up there, and within a month, she had drowned and was dead. At the time, Tammy and I were down here visiting my mother. I got a phone call and said, Angela has drowned at the Wilds. And your response is, just like my response was, I said, are they sure? I mean, are they sure it's her? Are they sure they identified the right one? Because, she just graduated college. She's on her way to serve God. She's up there going to counsel these kids, and she died. I want to tell you, I don't understand why that happened. But just because I don't understand it, hey, listen to me, doesn't mean that God's still not in control.
That's right.
That God still doesn't care. Well, sure He does. Listen, folks, our mind is limited. We're finite. Let me read you a couple of verses. Isaiah 55:8. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are my ways your ways, my ways, saith the Lord. The Lord says, you know what? My thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways aren't like your ways. Verse 9. For the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. God would not be God if we could figure out everything about Him. And listen, as a young person, and as this person who said he doesn't believe in God anymore because there's evil that exists in the world, I just want to tell you, I don't understand it all. I wrestle with those kinds of things. I bump into things in my life that I don't get. I don't know why my son had to get cancer. Why'd that happen to me? I was serving God, tithing. I was doing everything I thought I was supposed to be doing. You say, well, somebody, we had all kinds of crazy people email us that, well, your wife must have ate something wrong. I'm like, really? She ate a hot dog or something and gave you leukemia? I don't understand that. Romans 11:33 says this, oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and the knowledge of God. Listen, how unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out. A principle to remember for all of us, young or old, is this. We're going to run into, we're going to wrestle with, and we're going to realize sometimes God just doesn't make sense. And sometimes I wonder why God stays. His hand. Why doesn't he drop the hammer and punish the wicked? Well, there's some answers in the Bible. I'm going to tell you, sometimes I wonder why God doesn't do that. And listen, if you don't understand that you're going to bump into things in life that don't make sense when it comes to God, you may end up giving your faith up. Sometimes God doesn't seem like he's strong enough, that he makes sense enough, that he's right enough to do what you want him to do. But the fact is, he is. Let me show you something quickly. Flip over to the Gospel of John, chapter 11. Just quickly. John 11. Let me show you something. I've shown you this before, but I want to show it to you again. Look in John 11, verse number 1. Go with me. Gospel of John, chapter 11, verse 1. Now a certain man was sick named Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary and his sister Martha. Verse 2. It was that Mary which anointed the Lord with ointment, wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Verse 3. Therefore his sister sent unto him, saying, listen carefully, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. Now wait a minute. The one that you love is sick? Well, how come people get sick if Jesus loves them? Well, beyond that, look down in verse number 21 after Jesus shows up. Then said Martha to Jesus, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. Lord, if you'd have just showed up a little earlier, if you'd have just left a little earlier, he wouldn't have died. Sometimes we think that God's not strong enough or smart enough. But the fact is, he isn't. There was a whole purpose in Lazarus dying. But can I just give you this principle? When God doesn't make sense, guys and ladies, and we think in our mind this, well, God should have, or God could have, or boy, I would have done it that way. When you begin to think that way, could I just tell you? God's God, and he's good, and he's great, and he's God. He's able to do everything he needs to do. My job is just to trust him. I like the old, listen to what this man wrote. He says, duties are ours, events are God's. When our faith goes to meddling with events and try to hold account upon God's providence, and we begin to say, he begins to say, how wilt you do this? There's nothing left for us to do. We are to roll the weight of our weak souls upon him who is God omnipotent. And we're to trust him. God is the one who takes care of the events. I'm the one who just has the responsibility to do my duty. And so I just want to encourage you, kind of again by way of introduction, listen, when the Lord doesn't make sense, and when God doesn't drop his hammer of vengeance and justice like we would love to see him do sometimes, and when God doesn't show up in my storm like I wish he would, and I think in my heart, Lord, why are you hiding? Why are you standing afar off and you're not involved and interested, and this isn't important to you? When I begin to think like that, I just want to encourage you, you just got to trust him. That's what our faith is about. Because I guarantee you, folks, you're not going to understand everything God does. You're never going to understand it. And there's no way we can. Not only is our understanding limited, but our understanding is tainted. We're sinners. We're fallen in our nature. The old psalmist says, back in Psalm 10, Lord, basically, where are you? Well, let me tell you where the Lord is. He's exactly where He's supposed to be. He hadn't left. He hadn't moved away. He hadn't forsaken or abandoned anybody. He's exactly where He should be. Let me give you one more verse, and then I'm going to give you something else to think about. So if you went back to Psalm, go to Psalm 62 quickly. I gave you this a few months ago, but I'll give it to you again. Psalm 62, look at verse 8. Trust in Him at all times, you people. Pour out your heart before Him. God is a refuge for us. We're just to trust God at all times. We're to trust Him when things fall apart. We're to trust Him in the storm. We're to trust Him in our situation, in the struggle, in the sorrows. We just got to trust the Lord. That's what it means to walk by faith. That's what it means to live by faith. That's what it means to stand by faith. We just trust God in the midst of all those things. So remember this, when you run into and you wrestle with and you realize God doesn't make sense, you just need to trust Him. I mean, you think about God's Word. God's Word sometimes doesn't make sense to us. Sometimes God's will doesn't make sense. We were reading in Acts 27 when Paul learned to go to Rome. Paul didn't realize how he was going to get to Rome. He was going to get to Rome through a shipwreck. I'm sure he wouldn't have signed up for that. But when we go through something like that, we just trust God. Just trust Him at all times. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct thy path. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. So, I just kind of wanted to encourage you out there, if you're wondering where God is, you need to trust Him. I guarantee you, He's exactly where He's supposed to be. And He's exactly doing what He's supposed to be doing. Even though we may not understand it. There are times when we can't feel God working. And we can't find Him in the works. We can't figure out what He's doing. And we think that He's forgotten us or forsaken us or failed us. But I can assure you that He hasn't. So just remember that we trust Him in these times. When the psalmist cries out, "Where are you, Lord?" Well, he needs to trust that He's where he should be. Because I know He is. The second thing I want to kind of say before I dive in there, and I know we're going to run out of time, is you need to remember not only this principle to trust Him whatever's going on, but this promise that He's with you always. I know there are times when it feels like God has turned His back. When Jesus was on the cross, one of the things that He said was this, my God, why hast Thou forsaken me?" I mean, that was a difficult time for the Lord Jesus when He was on the cross, that the Lord turned His back, or God turned His back, in the sense that He was allowing Christ to accomplish His will. And it was a difficult thing to do. But could I just remind you of a couple of promises about where God is in the midst of your struggle? I can tell you this, He's not far away. He hasn't forgotten you, and He hasn't forsaken you. He's right there with you if you're a believer. And I want to give you a couple of verses about that. I want you to go to Romans chapter 8 quickly. Romans chapter 8. And let me give you a couple thoughts there. In Romans chapter 8, we have something about God's presence taught to us there. Look in verse 35 of Romans 8. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Or let's put this a little different. Is there anything that can separate us from Christ loving us? Well, look what he says. Shall tribulation, your troubles, distresses, persecution, famine, nakedness, peril, sword? So he's saying this, if I go through tribulation and distress and peril, if I go through nakedness, if I'm attacked with the sword, or I go through these dangerous things, verse 36, as it's written, for thy sake we're killed all the day long. We're accounted as sheep for the slaughter. But nay, in all these things we're more than conquerors through him that loved us. For I'm persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come. Did you get that? Things present, that storm, that suffering, that struggle, that situation where you believe God has abandoned you. And He hasn't. The things present, the things to come, there's heights nor depths nor any other creatures able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus. I'm telling you, wherever you are, Christ is with you. Because He loves you. Where's God? God's left. I want to tell you where God is. He's in your bosom. He's burying it with you. He hasn't left you. There's nothing that can separate you from His commitment, His care, His concern. Nothing. Where's God in my trouble? Right there with you. Go to Colossians 1. Let me show you. Years ago, I had a student in Bible class. He said, Brother Ivan, another teacher told me that the Bible doesn't say anywhere that Christ was in me. I said, well, yes, it does. Look in Colossians chapter 1, verse 27. To whom God would make known what is the riches of the glory of this mystery among the Gentiles, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. Christ in you, the hope of glory. If you're born again, can I tell you, a promise to remember that wherever you are, whatever you're going through, whenever you're going through it, Christ is in you, the hope of glory. He's not going to leave you. He's not going to let you down. And the psalmist cries out, Lord, where are you? I'll tell you where He is. He's right in your heart if you say it. That's where He is. Flip back to Romans chapter 8. Sorry, I pulled you off of that, but go back to Romans 8 quickly and let me show you something. In Romans 8, verse number 9, look what it says. Go with me. Romans 8, 9, he says, but you're not in the flesh, but in the Spirit, if so be that the Spirit of God dwells in you. Now, if any man have not the Spirit of Christ, he's none of His. It says here that the Spirit of God dwells in us. 1 Corinthians 3, the Spirit dwells in us. Ephesians 4:30, we're sealed by the Spirit. He is in us. Matthew 28:20, lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. The promise to remember is that if you're saved, God's with you wherever, whenever, however, whatever you're going through. So the psalmist here, he says, boy, Lord, where are you? Well, He's right there with you. Proverbs 15:3, the eyes of the Lord are in every place, beholding the evil and the good. I remember Brother Ivan, Tammy's dad, used to say this. If you got Christ in you, don't go dragging Him into a bar room. Because when you go in the bar room, He's going right in there with you. He said, you don't want the Holy Spirit going in that bar room with you. He said, hey, Christ is with you wherever you go. Could I just encourage you? Hey, the principle to remember is that we got to trust God when we're confused, and we have to remember God's promise that He's with us. And I realize we're going to have questions and concerns at times, but we just have to trust God. And then, last thought, and I know some of y'all think, you know what time it is? I know what time it is. The last thought is the problem, back in Psalm 10. We got the principle to remember, the promise to remember. What the problem? Why does God seem far off sometimes? I can't get into it, but I'll just give you, could I just say this one thing? Did you know that it is not unreasonable to believe that God sometimes punishes His children and it feels like He's turned from us? He punishes us. You say, you mean the God of the New Testament? I know the God of the Old Testament, but the one in the New Testament, yeah. Hebrews chapter 12, it says, whom the Lord loveth, He correcteth and scourgeth every believer. You know, it could be sometimes when we feel like God is not close, is that maybe He's putting us through something to correct us. I want to tell you, listen, the theology that's being pumped into most people's minds these days is that God is all love, 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 love. I want to tell you something. I love those boys. Matter of fact, one time, Montgomery back there standing by the door when he was about 3 or so, 2 or 3. We lived in South Carolina. We lived out in the sticks, out in the little farmhouse. We sat down to have Sunday dinner. I preached at the church and came home. We sat down and looked around, and Montgomery was gone. I looked at Tammy. She looked at me. I said, "Where's Montgomery?" We had a big picture window we could see from the table. We turned around and looked through that picture window. Montgomery was sitting in a pothole in the middle of the road. Sitting in a pothole playing. I bolted off of that table, busted out the front door, and there was a big old 4-wheel drive truck coming down the road. You know, I could hear his tires bearing down on Montgomery, and I ran out there and was hollering, and the guy was looking at me. I'm pointing at Montgomery. And he finally saw him and crawled to a stop. I jerked that kid up and drug him in the house. He was good after about 3 months. But you said, "Well, Brother Ivan, you corrected him?" "Yeah, I corrected him. You know why? Because I love him. I didn't want him to get squashed." Yes, sir. I know I'm out of time. I want to tell you, there are times, guys and ladies, when we feel like God is far away, because you know what? He might just be correcting you. I think it's interesting over in Hebrews, we didn't get there, but he says that he corrects and scourges. The word scourge means to bring pain. You know, sometimes God puts us through some painful things. I don't mean He's taking you to the woodshed and whipping your bottom. He's letting you go through some pain in here. Just think about this. Think about how painful Mary and Martha, the pain they felt when their brother died. He allowed that to happen. Now, I'm not saying He was correcting them for anything, because there was another purpose there, but He certainly allowed it to happen. Well, there's some other thoughts in there. I'll give them to you maybe next time. Somebody said this: trust Him when the dark doubts assail thee. Trust Him when thy strength is small. Trust Him when to simply trust Him seems the hardest thing of all. Trust Him, He's ever faithful. Trust Him, for His will is best. Trust Him, for the heart of Jesus is the only place of rest. I want to encourage you, trust Him when He doesn't make sense. Remember the promise that He's with you. He's there with you all. Let's pray. Father, we thank You for this day. Praise You for Your goodness. Bless all that came out today. Pray You use something that was said to be an encouragement or help. Thank You, Father, for sending the folks out. I pray, Lord, You've done a work in their hearts, and I just pray, Lord, You'd use it for Your glory in Jesus' name. Amen.